Thus far we have only had to understand how Dasein, grounded in temporality, takes care of time in existing, and how time makes itself public for being in the world in the taking care that interprets. We did not determine at all in what sense the public time expressed is, or whether it can be addressed as existing seien at all. Before any decision as to whether public time is merely subjective, or whether it is objectively real, or neither of the two, the phenomenal character of public time must first be determined more precisely. Making time public does not occur occasionally and subsequently. Rather, since as ecstatic and temporal Dasein is always already disclosed, and because understanding and interpretation belong to existence, time has also already made itself public in taking care. One orients oneself according to it, so that it must somehow be available for everyone. Although taking care of time can be carried out in the mode of dating that we characterized as based on events in the surrounding world, this always occurs in the horizon of a taking care of time that we know as astronomical and calendrical time reckoning. This reckoning is not a matter of chance, but has its existential and ontological necessity in the fundamental constitution of Dasein as care. Since Dasein essentially exists as thrown and entangled, it interprets its time heedfully by way of a reckoning with time. In this reckoning, the real making public of time temporalizes itself, so that we must say that the thrownness of Dasein is the reason there is public time. If we are to demonstrate that public time has its origin in factical temporality, and if we are to assure ourselves that this demonstration is as intelligible as possible, we must characterize beforehand the time interpreted in general in the temporality of taking care, if only to make clear that the essence of taking care of time does not lie in the application of numerical procedures in dating. What is existentially and ontologically decisive about reckoning with time must not be seen in the quantification of time, but must be more primordially conceived in terms of the temporality of Dasein reckoning with time. Public time turns out to be the time in which inner-worldly things at hand and objectively present are encountered. This requires that we call these beings unlike Dasein beings within time. The interpretation of within-timeness gives us a more primordial insight into the essence of public time, and at the same time makes it possible to define its being. The being of Dasein is care. This being exists entangled as thrown, delivered over to the world, discovered with its factical there, and dependent upon it in taking care. Dasein awaits its potentiality of being in the world in such a way that it reckons with, and on whatever is in eminent relevance for the sake of its potentiality of being. Everyday circumspect being in the world needs the possibility of sight, that is, brightness, if it is to take care of things at hand within what is present. With the factical disclosedness of world, nature has been discovered for Dasein. In its thrownness, Dasein is subject to the changes of day and night. Day with its brightness gives it the possibility of sight, night takes it away. Awaiting the possibility of sight while circumspectly taking care, Dasein, understanding itself in terms of its daily work, gives itself its time with the then when it dawns. The then taken care of is dated in terms of what is in the proximate context of relevance of the surrounding world, with getting light, the sunrise. Then, when the sun rises, it is time for. Thus Dasein dates the time that it must take for itself in terms of what is encountered within the world, and in the horizon of being delivered over to the world, as something for which there is an eminent relevance for the circumspect potentiality of being in the world. Taking care makes use of the handiness of the sun giving forth light and warmth. The sun dates the time interpreted in taking care. From this dating arises the most natural measure of time, the day. And since the temporality of Dasein that must take its time is finite, its days are also already numbered. While it is day, gives to a waiting that takes care the possibility of determining in a precautionary way the then of what is to be taken care of, that is, of dividing up the day. This dividing up in its turn is carried out with regard to what dates time, the moving sun. Like sunrise, sunset, and noon are distinctive places that this heavenly body occupies. Dasein, thrown into the world, temporalizing and giving itself time, takes account of its regular recurring passage. The occurrence of Dasein is a daily one by reason of interpreting time, by dating it, a way that is prefigured in its thrownness into the there. This dating of things in terms of the heavenly body giving forth light and warmth, and in terms of its distinctive places in the sky, is a way of giving time which can be done in our being with one another, under the same sky, and which can be done for everyone, at any time in the same way, so that within certain limits everyone is initially agreed upon. That which dates is available in the surrounding world, and yet not restricted to the actual world of useful things taken care of. Rather, in that world, the natural environment Umweltnatur and the public surrounding world öffentliche Umwelt are always discovered along with it. At the same time, everyone can count on this public dating in which everyone gives himself his time. It makes use of a measure that is available to the public. This dating reckons with time in the sense of time measurement that needs something to measure time, that is, a clock. This means that with the temporality of Dasein as thrown, delivered over to the world, and giving itself time, something like a clock is also discovered, that is, a handy thing that has become accessible in its regular recurrence in a making present that awaits. Thrown being together with things at hand is grounded in temporality. Temporality is the reason for the clock. As the condition of the possibility of the factical necessity of the clock, temporality is at the same time the condition for its discoverability. For while the course of the sun is encountered along with the discoveredness of inner-worldly beings, it is only by making it present in a waitingly retaining, and by doing so in a way that interprets itself, that dating in terms of things at hand in the public surrounding world is made possible and is also required. The natural clock, which is always already discovered with the factical thrownness of Dasein grounded in temporality, first motivates, and at the same time makes possible the production and use of still more handy clocks. It does this in such a way that these artificial clocks must be adjusted to the natural one if they are to make the time primarily discovered in the natural clock accessible in its turn. Before we characterize the main traits in the development of reckoning with time and the use of clocks in their existential and ontological meaning, we first want to characterize more completely the time taken care of in the measurement of time. If the time we take care of is really made public only when it gets measured, then public time is to be accessible in a way that has been phenomenally unveiled. We must have access to it by following up the way that which has been dated shows itself when dated in this reckoning way. When the then that interprets itself in heedful awaiting gets dated, this dating includes some such statement as then, when it dawns, it is time for the day's work. The time interpreted in taking care is always already understood as time for. The actual now that so and so is as such either appropriate or inappropriate. The now and thus every mode of interpreted time is not only a now that. That is essentially datable, but is at the same time essentially determined by the structure of appropriateness or inappropriateness. Interpreted time has by its very nature the character of time for, or not the time for. The making present that awaits and retains of taking care understands time in its relation to a what for, that is in turn ultimately anchored in a for the sake of which of the potentiality of being of Dasein. With this relation of in order to, time made public reveals the structure that we got to know earlier three as significant. It constitutes the worldliness of the world. As time for, the time that has been made public essentially has the character of world. Thus we shall call the time making itself public in the temporalizing of temporality world time. And we shall designate it thus not because it is present as an inner-worldly being, that it can never be, but because it belongs to the world in the existentially and ontologically interpreted sense. How the essential relations of the structure of the world, for example, the in order to, are connected with public time, for example, the then-when, on the basis of the ecstatic and horizontal constitution of temporality, must be shown in what follows. At any rate, only now can time taken care of be completely characterized as to its structure. It is datable, spanned, and public, and as having this structure, it belongs to the world itself. Every now, for example, that is expressed in a natural, everyday way, has this structure and is understood as such even if unthematically and preconceptually, when Dasein allows itself time in taking care. The disclosedness of the natural clock belongs to Dasein that exists as thrown and entangled, and in this disclosedness, factical Dasein has at the same time already brought about an eminent making public of the time taken care of. This making public is enhanced and strengthened as time reckoning is perfected, and the use of the clock becomes more refined. The historical development of time reckoning and the use of the clock is not to be presented here historiographically with all its possible variation. Rather, we want to ask existentially and ontologically, what mode of temporalizing of the temporality of Dasein is made manifest in the direction that reckoning with time and the use of the clock have developed? The answer to this question must further a more primordial understanding of the fact that time measured, that is, at the same time, the explicit making public of time taken care of is grounded in the temporality of Dasein, and indeed in a quite definite temporalizing of that temporality. If we compare primitive Dasein, which we used as the basis for the analysis of natural time reckoning, with more advanced Dasein, we find that for more advanced Dasein, day and the presence of sunlight no longer possess an eminent function, because this Dasein has the advantage of even being able to turn the night into day. Similarly, we no longer need to glance explicitly and directly at the sun and its position to ascertain the time. The manufacture and use of one's own measuring instruments permits us to read off the time directly by clocks explicitly produced for this purpose. The what hour is it is the what time is it. Because the clock in the sense of what makes possible a public reckoning of time must be regulated by the natural clock. Even the use of clocks is grounded in the temporality of Dasein that, with the disclosedness of the there, first makes possible a dating of the time taken care of. This is a fact, even if it is covered over when the time is read off. Our understanding of the natural clock that develops with the progressive discovery of nature directs us to new possibilities for time measurement that are relatively independent of the day and of any explicit observation of the sky. But in a way even primitive, Dasein makes itself independent of reading off the time directly from the sky, since it does not ascertain the position of the sun in the sky, but measures the shadow cast by some being available at any time. That can happen at first in the most simple form of the ancient peasant's clock. In the shadow that constantly accompanies everyone, we encounter the sun with respect to its changing presence at different places. The various lengths of the shadow during the day can be paced off at any time. Even if the lengths of the individual's body and feet are different, still the relation of the two remain constant within certain limits. Thus, for example, when one takes care of making an appointment, one designates the time publicly by saying, "When the shadow is so many footsteps long, then we will meet each other over there." Herein, being with one another in the more narrow limits of a surrounding world nearest to us, we tacitly presuppose that the locations at which the shadow is paced off are at the same latitude. Dasein does not even need to wear this clock. In a certain sense, it is this clock itself. The public sundial, in which the line of a shadow is counterposed to the course of the sun and moves along a graduated dial, needs no further description. But why do we find something like time at the position that the shadow occupies on the dial? Neither the shadow nor the graduated dial is time itself, nor is the spatial relation between them. Where then is the time that we read off directly not only on the sundial, but also on every pocket watch? What does reading off the time signify? To look at the clock cannot simply mean to contemplate the tool at hand and its changes, and to follow the positions of the pointer. Ascertaining what time it is in using the clock, we say, whether explicitly or not, now it is such an hour and so many minutes, now it is time to, or there is still time, namely now until. Looking at the clock is grounded in and guided by a taking time for oneself. What already showed itself in the most elemental reckoning of time becomes clearer here. Looking at the clock and orienting oneself according to time is essentially a no-seeing. Here the now is always already understood and interpreted in its complete structural content of datability, spanness, publicness, and worldliness. This is so obvious that we do not take any notice of it at all, still less do we know anything about it explicitly. But now saying is the discoursing articulation of a making present that temporalizes itself in unity with an awaiting that retains. The dating carried out in the use of the clock turns out to be the eminent making present of something present. Dating does not simply take up a relation with something present, but taking up a relation itself has the character of measuring. Of course, the number of the measurement can be read off directly. However, this means that when a length is to be measured, we understand that our standard is contained in it. That is, we determine the frequency of its presence Anwesenheit in that length. Measuring is constituted temporally when a present standard is made present in a present length. The idea of a standard implies unchangingness. This means that it must be present vorhanden in its constancy at every time for everyone. When the time taken care of is dated by treasuring, one interprets that time by looking at something present vorhandines and making it present, something that would not become accessible as a standard or as something measured except by our eminent making present. Since the making present of what is present does Gegenwärtigen von Anwesendum has special priority in the dating that measures. When one measures and reads off the time by the clock, one also expresses the now with special emphasis. Thus in measuring time, time gets made public in such a way that it is encountered in each case, and at each time for everyone as now and now and now. This time, universally accessible in clocks, is found as an objectively present multiplicity of nows, so to speak, though time measurement is not directed thematically toward time as such. The temporality of factical being in the world is what primordially makes the opening up of space Raumschlieffung possible, and spatial Dasein has always been referred to here of the character of Dasein out of an over there that has been discovered. Because of all this, the time taken care of in the temporality of Dasein is always bound up with some location of Dasein with regard to its datability. It is not that time is tied to a location, but rather temporality is the condition of the possibility that dating may be bound up with the spatially local, in such a way that the latter is binding for everyone as a measure. Time is not first coupled with space, but the space that is supposedly to be coupled with it is encountered only on the basis of temporality taking care of time. Inasmuch as both the clock and time reckoning are grounded in the temporality of Dasein, which constitutes this being as historical, we can show ontologically how the use of the clock is itself historical, and how every clock as such has a history. For the time made public in our measurement of it by no means turns into space, because we date it in terms of spatial relations of measurement. Nor is what is existentially and ontologically essential in time measurement to be sought in the fact that dated time is determined numerically in terms of spatial distances and changes in the location of some spatial thing. Rather, what is ontologically decisive lies in the specific snaking present that makes measurement possible. Dating in terms of what is present, spatially, is so far from a spatialization of time that this supposed spatialization signifies nothing other than that a being that is present vorhanden and sayenden for everyone in every now is made present gegenwärtigen in its own presence anwesen. Measuring time is essentially such that it is necessary to say now, but in obtaining the measurement we, as it were, forget what has been measured as such so that nothing is to be found except distance and number. The less time Dasein has to lose while taking care of time, the more precious time becomes, and the handier handlicker the clock must be. Not only must time be able to be given more precisely, but the determination of time itself should require the least time possible, though it must still agree with the time given by others. For the time being, we only wanted to point out the general connection of the use of the clock with temporality that takes time for itself. Just as the concrete analysis of the astronomical time reckoning in its full development belongs to the existential and ontological interpretation of the discovery of nature, the foundations of calendrical and historiographical chronology can also be set forth only in the scope of tasks of an existential analysis of historiographical cognition. The measurement of time brings about a making public of time, so that only in this way does what we usually call time become familiar. In taking care, its time is attributed to everything. It has it, and like every interworldly being, it can have it only because it is in time in general. The time in which interworldly beings are encountered we know as world time. On the basis of the ecstatic and horizontal constitution of temporality to which it belongs, world time has the same transcendence as the world. With the disclosedness of world time is made public, so that every being told you with interworldly beings that temporally takes care understands those beings as circumspectly encountered in time. The time in which what is present moves or is at rest is not objective, if by this is meant the being present in itself and sich forehand insane of beings encountered within the world. But time is just as little subjective, if we understand by that being present and occurring in a subject. World time is more objective than any possible object because, with the disclosedness of the world, it always already becomes ecstatically and horizontally objectified, objusered, as the condition of the possibility of interworldly beings. Thus, contrary to Kant's opinion, world time is found just as directly in what is physical as in what is psychical, and not just by way of a detour over the psychical. Initially, time shows itself in the sky, that is, precisely where one finds it in the natural orientation toward it, so that time is even identified with the sky. But world time is also more subjective than any possible subject because it first makes possible the being sane of the factically existing self, that being sane which, as is now well understood, is the meaning of care. Time is present neither in the subject nor in the object, neither inside nor outside, and it is prior to every subjectivity and objectivity because it presents the condition of the very possibility of this prior. Does it then have a being sane at all? And if not, is it then a phantom or is it more existent, sayender than any possible being sane? Any investigation that goes further in the direction of these questions will bump into the same limit that already posed itself for our provisional discussion of the connection between truth and being. In whatever way these questions are to be answered in what follows, or are to be asked primordially, we must first understand that temporality, as ecstatic and horizontal, first temporalizes something like world-time that constitutes a within-timeness of things at hand and present. But then these beings can never be called temporal in the strict sense. Like every being unlike Dasein, they are atemporal, whether they occur, arise, and pass away as something real or subsist ideally. If world-time thus belongs to the temporalizing of temporality, it can neither be volatilized subjectivistically nor be reified in a bad objectification. These two possibilities can be avoided with clear insight, not just by vacillating insecurely between them. Only if we understand how everyday Dasein theoretically conceives time in terms of its nearest understanding of time, and only if we understand how this concept of time and its dominance blocks the possibility of understanding what it means in terms of primordial time, that is, as temporality. Everyday taking care that gives itself time finds time in inner-worldly beings that are encountered in time. Thus our illumination of the genesis of the vulgar concept of time must take its point of departure from within-timeness.